and she's also mad that he was cheating on her. Then evidently, according to her, he quit drinking or proved or told her he quit drinking, and she moves back in October. At that point in time, she wakes up on November 2nd. He's back, drunk, pouring vodka and orange juice on her and the kids. He's yelling. She ends up barring the door, calling the cops, and moving out. She returns the next day because he says she can come get her stuff. He shows up, he's out of control again, and she's evidently filming, according to her. She ends up moving out of the area to get away from him. Then we have Candy Hagen. He meets her sometime in November 2013 at the boat. I forgot which boat it was, but it didn't matter. Went out a couple times here, and then they started having constant interaction with each other. By my count, they had 282 contacts, either phone calls or texts, between November 23rd and December 1st. He obviously played the part of a charmer. He indicated he owned a construction company. He built and remodeled houses. And later on, in December, he indicated to her that he was going to buy gift cards for all his employees. The other person involved, or the other female also involved, is Nicole Monasco. Sorry, I butchered her name, but he is Tim's ex-wife. She is Tim's ex-wife. They had 2 kids together. They were supposed to have joint custody, but he's not using the kids in terms of the joint custody agreement that they reached. She's keeping track of all of it, and also he's not paying any child support and hadn't paid any child support since 2010. One of the issues was because he had no driver's license, he couldn't get up to Geneseo, and at some point, according to her, he talked of selling his Rock Island house to move out to Geneseo to be closer to him. And then, obviously, we go back to Ms. Olson, and I bring that back up because he denies having a sexual relationship with her during this period of time, but they have over 450 phone and or text contacts sometime just before Thanksgiving over quite a period of time. Also, at that time, Mr. McVay was 38 years old. He's unemployed. He's fired even by his mother for failure to come to work. He's on unemployment. He has no car. His license is suspended. His parents are paying his bills, his insurance, his house payments, even his school loans. So there's obviously a shortage of income in Mr. McVay's life. Next, we move on to the time period between December 1st and December 26th of 2013. First of all, we start with Ms. Hagen. I count over 800 different contacts, either by phone call or text again, over that period of time. At some point in time, she invites him out to Las Vegas. She was going to pay for the tickets, the room, and the food. He was to fly out there December 29th, and they were going to return January 1st. This was all decided before December 18th, 2013. There was a conversation that was picked up on one of the texts that on December 20th, the defendant indicated to her he didn't know which car he would be driving out there. There was a discussion about her driveway, the clearing of the snow, and being dropped off at her house and not at the airport. The trip had been set by December 18th. This car issue had been set up on December 20th. Next, we move to Ms. Smitty again. She wanted nothing to do with the defendant. She was afraid of him. She had blocked him from the phone and the email, but they still had Gmail access. On December 26th, he sends her a Gmail saying, "I'm singing karaoke, and Sylvia isn't the same without you." This to a woman who wanted obviously nothing to do with it. During this period in December, especially the time just before Christmas, the defendant's father and the entire McVay family all believed that Mr. McVay and Tim were going to end up going down to Kentucky or Tennessee to bring Miss Smitty back home. It was a 2 to 3 day trip, sometime right after Christmas. Basically, there was no follow-up on it, mainly because Miss Smitty didn't want anything to do with him, and Mr. McVay went hunting back on December 27th. Now, during this whole period of time, just around the Christmas time, and I'll bring Nicole Monasco back in here, Mr. McVay had the kids on December 21st and 22nd, and they had a family Christmas party. He never mentioned to the kids, his ex-wife, his parents, anybody, about going on a trip to Las Vegas. He did mention to the kids he was going to have them for a couple of days or some time period after Christmas. He obviously didn't. During this period of time, as I've indicated, his parents wouldn't even let him use their car because obviously he had to have impound fees paid for the grandmother's car when he got arrested for driving while suspended earlier in December. And with Miss Olson, I counted approximately 590 text and phone call contacts between December 1st and December 26th. Included, to the best of my knowledge, about 37 of them on December 26th itself. We now move on to Friday, December 27th. He has at least, because the deleted contacts, the testimony was that some of them couldn't be recovered if they've been copied over, but I'm counting 42 contacts on that day between Ms. Haiti and the defendant. Included with that, there was one at 1:22 p.m. that day from Ms. Haiti to the defendant, which she asked him about coming up to her house Saturday the 28th because of the weather, because she wanted to make sure he got there so he could get to Las Vegas. That one was never really responded to. And again, at 9:13 that night, she sent a text to the defendant asking him if he has his kids. There's nothing in the response. It was deleted. It must have been picked up, but obviously he must have responded in the affirmative because her text back says, "I will leave you alone so you can spend some time with them." He never had the kids. Wasn't true. Main reason is during this period of time he's also going back and forth with Carrie Olson, which by my count was about 48 times that day. At one point during about 4 p.m. that day, he's texting both of them about the span. They're texting back and forth, all three of them, in relation to about every 2 or 3 minutes, and he's calling Carrie honey during this period of time. And she sent him a text about 10:31 that night saying she's fed up. Doesn't say about what, but she's fed up. Now we move to December 28th. First with Miss Haiti. I count about 15 total contacts that day between her and the defendant. Again, I may be off by a few, but that's pretty much it. And towards the end of the evening, she sends one about 11:40 saying, "Is everything okay? Haven't heard from you tonight." During this period of time, we have another female in the picture, Amanda Smith. Amanda Smith was Carrie's best friend. She arrived in town at 2 a.m. early in the morning on December 28th. The plans, according to her, were that she was to meet Carrie Olson at noon on Sunday at Happy Joe's. It's an ongoing thing. Her best friend, meet him on Sunday. She had no plans to meet with Carrie on Saturday. The main reason being is that she's going to spend some time with her husband's family. Bringing back Miss Olson. He begins, Tim does, beginning contact with her about 12:48 p.m. that afternoon. At one point, about 1:04, he texts her wanting her to call. The records show that about 1:16, there's a 4-minute call from Carrie to the defendant. Don't know what was said. That is the last text or cell until the 3:58 a.m. 12:29 phone call from the defendant to the victim. Sometime, and this is the issue in terms of what ends up happening, we know what the defendant says was what Carrie was up to when he was at her house that day. What he says is true. The problem is you don't really know where she is at because there is no trail. We know that at 4 o'clock that day, she was at the Mother Hubbard's cupboard because they found 2 receipts in the car at 4:07 p.m. One was for gas for $33.59. And I found the other one kind of interesting. Nobody really touched on it. It kind of got blown over at the time of the testimony. But she buys chips, a pack of Camels, and a pack of Marlboros at that time. Now, I'm not a smoker. Never have been. But I do know that nobody who smokes Camels also smokes Marlboros, and vice versa. So the question is who she's buying 2 different packs of cigarettes for. Probably one for herself, but not sure who the other one's for. In relation to that, we do know from Amanda that she received a text from Carrie Olson about 10:31 that night wanting to know if Amanda wanted to do something because she was coming back from Dubuque. It wasn't in the records, but Amanda had indicated earlier she had received a text from Carrie stating that she had gone to Dubuque by herself. That falls in line with what the defendant had indicated in relation to the fact that she was mad at her parents, she was mad at her sister, she was mad at Justin, she was mad at everybody in relation to her both family and friends, and basically wanted to get away. Did she go to Dubuque? Don't know. There's no proof of it. There's no proof what she did that day, other than the fact that we have this receipt that she was at Mother Hubbard's Cupboard on 38th Street in Rock Island about 4:07. According to the defendant, she came over about 3 o'clock. She'd been drinking. She left about 4. That was about the time she could have gone to the gas station. She returns about 6. She's been drinking, and now she's been smoking pot. According to Mr. McVay, Amanda backed out of plans that day. Carrie leaves again. She returns about midnight. Then falls asleep, wakes up. Miss Olson's gone. About 3:45, that's when he calls her, and she says she's still driving him to Minnesota at approximately 4 to 5 to 6 a.m., according to prior plans that they had. The reason I bring up some of these numerous texts is there's never a mention of anything about her taking him to Minnesota in any of the texts that were recovered, at least on her phone, in relation to texting him. According to Mr. McVay, about 5:30 to 6 a.m., that's when she decided to let him take her car to Minneapolis. Now, you've got her parents, you've got Amanda, you've got Justin, you've got Jacqueline, hell, you've even got Katie Smitty, who doesn't even like Carrie, all adamant that she would never loan her car out to anybody, much less Mr. McVay, who doesn't have a license and basically is suspended. Supposedly, she gives her debit card to Mr. McVay to go get $400 to top off the gas tank. And the times the card is attempted to be used is everywhere from 6:17 to 6:32, the various locations around. The PIN number's wrong. He ends up going inside and getting $20 worth of gas from the clerk that he happens to know, and they bypass the PIN number. The next time we see Mr. McVay is at 7:54 that morning at the tobacco outlet. He's by himself in that car. There's nobody else in the car. He says he goes back home. Carrie had washed her face and brushed her hair, maybe even applied a little makeup, and went out to the car. And in order to get the car ready for him to take to Minnesota, she put some piddly shit in the trunk, like her jacket, her purse, the makeup, and a couple of other items. He says he took her home, saw her use the PIN number, get in the garage, and he left sometime 6:30 to 6:45. That was told to several people. There's some questions at this point in time. Why would Amanda be lying about having no plans with Carrie on December 28th? How was Ms. Olson supposed to be getting back to the area at noon to see Amanda at Happy Joe's if she was leaving with him at 4, 5, or 6 a.m.? There's no way to get up there and get back if he's being taken to the Minneapolis airport. When were you going to tell Tammy that you were going straight to the airport and not coming to the house where it had already been arranged where Bonnie was supposed to meet you at 2 o'clock in the afternoon? And how were you going to get home from Hastings if she drove you up there and dropped you off? In the meantime, 6:08 that morning, Mr. McVay's texting Tammy. 6:13, she responds. This is before he's seen on the video getting the gas and using that ATM machine. There's 9 total texts between the two of them before he gets to La Crosse, Wisconsin. From 12:14 to 3:35 that day, there were at least 11 contacts were deleted. If you go through the phone records, there was at least 20 contacts. I'm not sure which to believe, but there were numerous contacts between the two of them. In relation to that, he leaves at 7:54. I left the 2 boards up there. One is the route up, one is the route back. In relation to that, at 7:54, he's in the tobacco outlet and he leaves. He tells Detective Boyd After I left the tobacco outlet, the only stops I made from that point on the tobacco outlet were restroom, beverages, fuel as needed, quote unquote. Well, I'm not a map person, and obviously it's one of those situations where you can argue over the road conditions and the time, but if a person is driving from here to Hastings, Minnesota, and leaving at 7:54, it doesn't take 6 hours and a half to get there, no matter what. Especially if you're only stopping for the restroom, beverage, and fuel. In relation to that, there are no phone calls from his phone, from his cell phone, evidently from 3:58 a.m. to 12:14 p.m. that day. There are 7 phone calls made between 12:14 and 3:35. Again, his phone goes silent from 1:35 to 2:58 p.m., which is about the time the state's theory is that he was dumping the body off in Presley Circle. And then there's 3 more phone calls from 2:58 to 3:35 p.m. There's various texts, various phone calls then between the time he's at Miss Hagen's house and the time Bonnie takes him to the airport. But one of the most important ones is at 4:57, Tammy texts him and says, "The hotel is 4 Queens." Again, everybody sort of glossed over that, but again, when I went through everything, it's a matter of having to put all the circumstantial evidence in terms of a picture, in terms of how you're looking at things. We now move to the 30th. Ms. Olson failed to show up for work. Amanda, who had not been able to get a hold of her all day on Sunday, had called Carrie's sister and also called Mrs. Olson. Dave Olson goes to Carrie's house, sees Justin, and the search is on. Now, the issue comes up at some point. Mr. McVay starts indicating that he had terrible phone reception out there and had trouble getting and receiving calls and everything. Now, it wasn't brought up in any of the testimony because this person didn't testify, but going through all the phone records that were submitted, between 10:48 in the morning and 12:37 in the afternoon from some unknown third party, there's text going out to the defendant out in Las Vegas from a 563 prefix, and he is texting that person back almost immediately. And at some point that day, he does call his son, Mr. McVay does, and tells him he won't be seeing him over the Christmas break. Mr. Olson starts texting the defendant about 2:55. And then again, sometime about 6, and the defendant responds about 7:11 or 7 o'clock that night. And in the meantime, we bring back Mrs. Smitty again. Because during that period of time and that evening, there are 3 Gmails going back and forth. I found one of them rather peculiar. The last one the defendant sent her was, quote, "It would be so much better with you here too," unquote. I wonder how Miss Hagen would have thought about that one. Okay. Now we move to the 31st. Mr. Olson tried 12 different contacts with the defendant. He responded twice. The defendant's mother tried 2 contacts, didn't get a response. Ms. Olson's sister, Jacqueline, tried 17 times different contacts to get a hold of the defendant. He responded twice. During one of these responses, he responds to Mr. Olson by telling him that the car is at the Minneapolis airport. Well, we knew that's not true. And at some point, they wanted to know where the defendant was staying. He told, I forgot whether it was Jacqueline or Dave Olson, that he wasn't checked into his room yet. And that basically, at some point, he said, "I'm going to try to get a flight home sooner," even though he was originally going to come back January 1st. And again, even though he's supposedly having problems getting his phone working one way or the other, he's Gmailing Katie Smitty again sometime around 1:32 a.m. on the 1st, wishing her a Happy New Year. We now move to the actual day of January 1st. Starting with Miss Smitty again. He exchanges 6 different Gmails with her during the day, even though he's supposedly having trouble with his phone. His mother tries to contact him once, there's no response. His dad tries 6 times to contact him, gets 3 responses. Dave Olson, by my count, tries at least 9 times and responded once on a half-hour phone call and finally admitted he was at the Four Queens. The one to his dad I found most important out of all this is, he says to his dad, "I will call you later because it's too loud." He says he met his friend Tammy, she paid for everything, not to worry about it. The dad's basic response is, "Go somewhere where it's quiet and get a hold of me." And that is also the day that he did get permission to search his residence. According to Tammy Hagee, the first she ever became aware there was an emergency at home was January 1st. Tim never mentioned it on the 30th or the 31st. She wasn't aware of any disappearance of Miss Olson until the morning of January 1st when she actually talked on the phone. During this period of time, she indicated, according to the defendant, he's leaving his phone at the front desk every night to be charged because she doesn't see it. We now move to the 2nd of January. About 1 o'clock earlier that morning, the defendant arrived at the Hagee house with Tammy. He left about 3 o'clock then. Evidently, it's about a 4 to 4.5 hour drive home. There are a lot of phone calls in relation to contacts between Mr. McVay and various people between then and the time he comes home. There's 3 Gmails again to Katie Smitty. And she initiated some of these, so it's not all one way. But the last one I found funny, at 3:04, he sends her a Gmail saying, "I'm on my way home, I'm driving home now." And her response was, quote, "in her car," unquote. Even she knew that Ms. Olson didn't want her car. I count 43 total phone contacts between 1:24 that afternoon and 11:47 that night. There were 32 of those contacts before 7:13 in the evening, 11 of them after 10:28 in the evening. There's absolutely nothing going on from the defendant's phone, at least in terms of anything that showed up deleted or was still there, again, because it's not a perfect situation when things are deleted in terms of being covered, but there are no calls or texts from 7:13 to 10:28, which, according to that map over there, is about the time he's in the Rochester area. The question becomes, what are you in the Rochester area for? Where is that a direct line from Hastings to Dubuque and to Davenport, if in fact you cared so much for Carrie, you wanted to get back here and get this thing settled? Now, then he gives this statement to the Davenport Police Department. Obviously, there's other issues involved here. I use the phone contacts and the messages in relation to the fact that obviously Mr. McVay knew something was going on back here, and I don't feel he was honest about dealing with it. Are there other people and other places to look? Sure. Justin Mueller. Why would you look at Justin Mueller? He's Army trained. He may have the ability to kill someone without leaving a trace. He may have been jealous, especially if Mr. McVay is truthful about the fact he was going to get his butt thrown out of the house. It seemed Carrie had a 30-day shelf life for some of her boyfriends. She did for Tim. Evidently, according to Amanda and according to Tim, she wasn't happy with Justin, and he'd been there about 30 days, and his time was probably just about up. And also the fact, according to the defense, they brought up, and they are correct, that there are no texts from Mr. Mueller from 12:28 at 9:19 p.m. till 12:30 at 9:55 a.m. There are no calls from his phone from December 29th at 4:57 p.m. till December 30th at 9:48. The flip side of that is that the text he was sending out before then was that he was watching Carrie's dog. He figured Carrie was with Amanda. The big question becomes is 2 issues. Why would he still be at the house January 3rd when Mr. Olson comes over? If he truly did something to Miss Olson, the first inclination, again, my reasonable inference I would draw is, I get the hell out of here. if he truly did something. And the other issue is, why would he drive all the way to Minnesota to get rid of her body? Especially 4 miles away from where Mr. Olson or Mr. McVay had dropped the car. What are the odds of that? And also, the last thing in relation to he's probably not involved would be that there are no cell phone or text pings otherwise in the Quad City area from his phone during this entire period of time. In relation to Ms. Olson's phone ping, there's a lot of reasonable theories, and I'll get to the theory issue here in a few minutes, but basically the issue becomes how her phone ended up somewhere in Milan and dead for 41 hours before it starts pinging again. Well, one reasonable explanation is it was put somewhere where it couldn't get to the network, like a dumpster, garbage bin. Monday was the 30th. It got moved. Once it got moved, it was able to get access again to the network, and that's when it started pinging. Dr. Middleton, the defense brought up in terms of the relation to the cause of death. I call it HUM, but it's HUM actually. I still think that's the single biggest issue is the cause of death and where it occurred. Basically, the reasonable inference is the state put forward are working in suffocation. I have a couple of others that nobody bothered to bring up. How about you put a plastic bag over somebody's head? Doesn't leave a mark. How about you take a towel, come up behind it, and smother them? Doesn't leave a mark. Because obviously, if you're choking somebody, you're going to leave handprints on their neck. The problem the defense has in terms of arguing against this cause of death is it's not an accident or reckless conduct on the behalf of whoever killed her, because the reasonable inference is given where the body was found is she didn't end up in the by herself. It's also the fact that there's a lack of natural causes and suicide or exposure, which give a reasonable inference that where the body was found because she was murdered, not because she walked out there naked and just dropped dead. The problem that Mr. McVay has in this case is that on the way up there, he's going to cross at a time that makes sense according to anybody's timeline. But then it takes an hour and a half to get to Rochester and another 2 hours to get just outside Hastings. Anybody can look around and figure out that something's going on and you're not just stopping for gas, bathroom, or fuel. In relation to the debit card issue, it's obvious Mr. McVay did not know the PIN number on the card when it was trying to be used the morning of the 29th. He says, and he correctly says, that it was Amanda's birthday. There's a lot of explanations. Some make sense, some don't. Again, it was never brought up, but I'm not a female. But I've been married to one for almost 30 years. And a reasonable inference I would have is that when you start changing PIN numbers or passcodes on a computer, you tend to forget what they are. Because if you use the wrong one enough, you get blocked out, just like this debit card was. And so when you change it, after using a number for a period of time or a passcode, you write it down. I write down, I have a list at my house of every passcode in relation to the internet, because I can't remember them all, because there's so many different ones. And if I use them wrong, I get locked out, I gotta make phone calls, or even worse, I gotta change them. And that's why I write them down. A reasonable inference is that somewhere in her wallet, which was never found, she had a note as to what the new passcode was. She didn't write the number down, could have written down Amanda's birthday on it. And in relation to that, as long as I'm on this, the wallet's never found. Well, what's in a wallet? Money, the debit card, any store cards or any other credit card she had, and her driver's license. None of that was ever found. What did they find? Well, they found a purse. What's in the purse? A makeup bag. And her hairbrush. And a cell phone charger. And some other female items. And, most important of all, her checkbook. Now, again, I am not a female. But again, I don't know of many females that if I'm going to get, they were going to give me their car, they would leave their makeup, their hairbrush, their wallet inside the purse in the vehicle. Couldn't ship, according to Mr. McVay. The reasonable inference is that he went through her wallet and took her money and took the debit card. Obviously, he got rid of everything, but he never went through the purse because the purse is what contained all these other items that a person who was wanting to get away would need, such as makeup, a hairbrush, and a checkbook. The reasonable inference is he didn't go through it. So that's why those are there, and that's why everything else is gone. We now move on to Dr. Death. The time of death in relation to December 29th, given no new nail book because she just had her manicure done. In relation to that, that makes sense because obviously if she died at some point further in the future, a week or two down the line, there'd be obvious signs that her manicure had either A, faded, or B, there'd be new growth above and below the manicure itself. We move on to the defendant's relationships, and that's why I brought all the women in to begin with here. He lived with Carrie for a month. He lived with Katie Smitty twice for about a month. And he actually lived with Tammy for about 2.5 to 3 weeks between meeting her, going to Las Vegas, and then on the subsequent trip later in January. Ms. Olson and Ms. Smitty both complained that he was cheating on her. Why did Ms. Olson continue to deal with you? Maybe you're drinking friends. Maybe you were her best male friend. Maybe you gave her a shoulder to cry on. Evidently, she had issues with her family and obviously now with Justin. And obviously, she had a car. So that gave you wheels because your parents weren't going to, even though they were taking you around 3 or 4 times a week, they weren't your personal chauffeur. These issues with his women sort of remind me of a snake oil salesman, Mr. McVay. You say what you need to get into their charms, to get them to do what you want. I don't know if it's self-esteem issues, I don't know what the issues are. But all of these women seem to fall for you for various reasons. But, like the snake oil salesman sold his product and moved on. Why? Because when people realized that the stuff didn't do what he said it was going to do, then they come after him on a refund. They'll come after him and want to kill him. Well, living with you for about a month, they saw through you, and they got rid of you. Even Tammy got tired of you, and they didn't even take a month. The other issue is, if in fact you were so concerned about Miss Olson, why wouldn't you tell anyone where you were at in Las Vegas? To various people, you said, I didn't have a room. I'm with guy friends and a buddy. The cars at the Minneapolis airport. You knew before you got there where you were staying. Lastly, or not lastly, but we move on now to the Hastings Gazette. The last time he saw you in person was February 1st. And there was no communication, according to her, after March 5th. You, to my best knowledge, have no other friends or relatives in the area. Why were you checking the paper's website 43 times from January 1st to April 4th? It wasn't because you were going to plan on moving up there with her, because she dumped you back in late January, early February. And besides, you were planning on moving to Geneseo, if you were truthful, to be with your kids because you didn't have a license. One of the last points I bring up is this travel bag that people have made an issue of. given the fact where the barcode was found, the route of travel, and what the store had indicated as far as the receipt would have shown, the only reasonable inference to be drawn is that you purchased that bag in La Crosse on December 29th, which is just a small piece of the puzzle, but again, it's circumstantial evidence. And the reason it all comes up is that the direct evidence in this case is obviously very weak. There's not a lot of direct evidence. And circumstantial evidence I always find suspect, because you can always find different reasonable inferences that can be drawn from a specific piece of evidence. It's sort of like a painting. You go to over to the Figge and you look at some of the paintings, and I may think they're crap, and you may think they're the next thing according to Rembrandt. Everybody's got it, it's a reasonable inference drawn on what you're seeing, or drawn on what you know. And it's one of those situations, it's almost like a flow chart. You take a piece of circumstantial evidence and you start comparing it to other pieces of circumstantial evidence. And if it doesn't fit, then it's discarded. If it does fit, you add another piece, and another piece, and another piece, and see if they all end up fitting together. And that's how circumstantial evidence has to be looked at, because in and of itself, it's just one little piece of evidence. And it has to be combined with a lot of other pieces, because direct evidence is a lot better than circumstantial evidence. And in this case, in relation to Mr. McVay's statements, the only way not to have the pieces of the circumstantial evidence matched is for everyone but him to be lying. There's no way that his version makes any sense compared to what everybody else has indicated about what was going on during that period of time. He's alone getting gas in Rock Island, and he's at the tobacco outlet alone in that car. The only reasonable inference is that she ended up dying sometime that morning between 4 and 6:15 at his own house. That's within the time frame in terms of the validity also in relation to giving the weather temperatures. Now, you may ask in terms of the carpet and everything else. Well, I don't find a lot of it's relevant, but I didn't find a lot of weight to be there because a lot of things could have happened. If you ignore the mountain of circumstantial evidence in this case, all lined up and they all fit, you have to ignore the reality of the situation. Her body was in that car when you were at the tobacco outlet. My reasonable inference is that she was dead at your house. I don't know how you did it, but you did it. She didn't die of natural causes. She didn't die because she just passed out or whatever. You did something to her. Working, choked her, put a bag over her head. Like I said, there's a lot of ways to do it without leaving a trace. You got yourself ready to go. My belief is the towel that was found in the back seat was you from taking a shower and getting ready to go because you had to clean up after yourself. That the time you spent in Rochester, both going up and coming back, was being used to clean that car out, one way or the other. That there really wasn't a lot of evidence in relation to your house because, like I said, and I didn't bring this up earlier, but it goes to the truthfulness of Mr. McVay's statements. He tells two different detectives in the Danforth Police Department he wasn't having sex with her. He tells Jabba, Jayla, somebody, the person didn't testify, but there's a phone record there, that he didn't have sex with her. But he tells Mr. Olson on January 4th, hey, I just wanted to give you a heads up, we had sex that night. What? How in the world would you not remember whether you had sex with the person who's now missing and you were the last one to see her? Why would you lie about something like that which didn't give rise to anything else other than the fact it goes to your truthfulness and believability on everything else you told Detective Boyd that night? The whole issue here becomes, Mr. McVay, is I'm not finding you guilty to make anybody happy. Either the media, Mr. Olson, the Olson family, whatever. I'm finding you guilty because based on the totality of the evidence of the witnesses, combined with the fact your version to the Davenport Police Department on January 3rd is misleading at best, and at worst, just a flat-out lie, that I'm finding you guilty of count 1 murder, count 2 concealment of a homicidal death. The matter is to be set 60 days for sentencing. The parties are to get together in terms of working out a sentencing hearing. He's remanded.